Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. Swiping optimistically on Tinder, I'd expected some awkward dates here and there, or maybe short-term casual flings at most, not unexpectedly uncovering bizarre criminal schemes and danger concealed cleverly behind fake, alluringly normal-seeming profiles. But my brief yet unsettling catfishing encounter with Eam ultimately exposed some dark, hidden realities lurking just out of sight about the kinds of deceptive individuals potentially using dating apps among the crowds of folks simply seeking connections. And at first appeared to me a sweet and quirky potential match. Cute dimpled smile, cheeky bio, similar pop culture interests, and witty banter back and forth in messages. After engaging in increasingly lively conversation for a few weeks within the app, we finally made arrangements to casually meet up for coffee in person, both eager to see if those conversational sparks would translate offline too. I had arrived deliberately early to secure a small table towards the back, nervously smoothing down my shirt and running my hand through my hair, anxious to make a positive first impression when this mystery match I'd been building up in my head had actually transformed into a real living person before my eyes. Right on the decided time, an upbeat young brunette woman I didn't recognize walked in cheerfully and glanced around the room before lighting up and making a beeline straight for me when we made eye contact. But my initial eager smile faltered immediately to a confused frown. Despite sharing similarities, this total stranger looked decidedly nothing like the Eam I had been messaging for weeks, nor did she resemble any of the photos attached to her profile. This unknown girl beaming down at me was visibly overweight and sallow, with unwashed frizzy hair, ruddy skin scattered with pimples, and rumpled, ill-fitting clothing. As she slid enthusiastically into the chair across from me, I found myself hurriedly double-checking the Tinder app still pulled up on my phone screen, uncertain if there was somehow a misunderstanding happening. But no, the date details on my chat with Eam matched perfectly with the plans this mystery girl had just eagerly shown up for after weeks of build-up. Right on cue, she enthusiastically introduced herself as Emmy, while thrusting a clammy outstretched hand my way in forced familiarity and camaraderie, still clearly oblivious to my obvious confusion and unease. Ingrained good manners immediately kicked in despite the alarm bells. I awkwardly shook her hand, skirting eye contact as I rebounded into making benign small talk. This strange, cheerfully chatty girl, calling herself some version of M, prattled breezily on about how unspeakably excited and grateful she was that we were finally meeting in person after connecting so amazingly well online. I simply continued, nodding and smiling politely along, trying to strategize how best to delicately address this rather alarming catfishing situation right off the bat without humiliating her further. There seemed no reasonable way images this misleading could have been unintentional. Despite the awkwardness permeating the meetup, Emmy remained effortlessly charming and conversational throughout our quick coffee non-date. But the more we spoke face-to-face, the more tiny glimpses of pivotal truths seemed to unintentionally leak through the cracks in her carefully constructed identity and stories. Under my closer observation now, she made references to a hometown she had explicitly listed in her profile, but clearly possessed very little legitimate intimate knowledge of the actual place when gently probed. Quite cagey, hazy explanation were given for the obvious drastic changes in her style and physical appearance between photos and reality, yet none quite added up properly or rang fully true to my increasingly skeptical ears. The bright flashing warning red flags about this situation were impossible to ignore at this point, but bluntly calling out her attempted catfishing publicly could spark an unstable, volatile reaction in her I may quickly lose control of. So I made polite excuses about needing to leave after finishing my coffee, promising perhaps a bit too enthusiastically that I would love to see where things went from here and meet up with her again soon. Of course, my continued aloofness and dodging of any follow-up messages or date invites in the coming days only made her inquiries about securing that second date together grow increasingly incessant and clingy. I knew I wouldn't be able to just ghost her fully until she lost interest, not without definitive answers about who exactly was behind this clearly fake profile using stolen personal photos, and what on earth their underlying motives could be for putting such effort into catfishing and deceiving random people online. Running a standard, thorough public background check on her for peace of mind seemed the wisest move forward, while Emmy's usage of a false name and stolen personal photos lifted from unsuspecting women's social media accounts did neatly explain the blatantly misleading catfish. Even uglier and more unsettling truths about this mysterious scammer quickly began to surface once I dug deeper. As it turned out, this individual had apparently created countless similar false identities and dating profiles in recent years, using a revolving gallery of photos mined from anonymous internet sources. Her extensive, winding trail of jilted alleged former lovers and worrisome unsolved financial fraud strongly indicated deep involvement with manipulation and con artistry targeting vulnerable men she encountered on sites like Tinder. In the end, I suppose I was quite fortunate to have escaped her convoluted scamming efforts unscathed this one time, picking up on hints early that something seemed off and avoiding getting swept up further into whatever scheme she was running. However, many others had clearly not been so lucky in their encounters once reeled in by her appealing false storefronts and profuse flattery. It was impossible to know exactly what malicious purposes she was so successfully funding through these serial heartless deceptions. But the fact that she seemed to focus solely on exploiting dating apps and stolen identities to prey upon single men specifically suggested nothing good. I felt morally conflicted about potentially turning her into authorities, given she still knew my real identity too from meeting of in person. Yet how could I stand by in good conscience knowing she was still actively robbing and conning eager, well-meaning people blinded by the hope of romantic connections? After further grappling with the ethics of the situation, I finally made the decision to contact local police discreetly and submit our entire weeks-long messaging through Tinder to aid in building a fraud case against her. I made sure to do so totally anonymously for my own continued safety, in case she tried tracing things back to me as the source. I never could have imagined that a simple right swipe on Tinder would lead me into a living nightmare, but my harrowing experience with Tom shattered my sense of safety and trust in the world of online dating. It all began innocently enough a mutual match, an intriguing profile, and a conversation that flowed as smoothly as a gentle river. Tom had an uncanny way with words, making me feel an instant connection, as if we had known each other for years. I found myself eagerly anticipating the notification sound, signaling his every message. After several days of nonstop texting, our chemistry undeniable, Tom suggested that we take the next step and meet in person for a casual coffee date. Despite the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach urging caution, I brushed it aside, convincing myself that it was just nerves. I agreed to meet him at a quaint little cafe nestled in the heart of downtown, a place I had always found comforting. On the day of our fateful encounter, I meticulously selected my outfit, wanting to make the perfect first impression. As I stepped into the cafe, my heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Tom was already there, seated at a table, his intense gaze locking onto mine the moment I entered. We embraced, and I couldn't help but notice the fierce strength in his arms, the way he held me just a little too tightly. As we settled into our seats and began to chat, Tom's demeanor gradually transformed. He started interrogating me about my past relationships and any male friends I had, his tone growing increasingly hostile and accusatory. I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but he kept circling back, his intensity making me squirm uncomfortably in my seat. The once charming man I had been texting now seemed like a stranger, his eyes darkening with a possessiveness that sent chills down my spine. Without warning, Tom leaned in close and suggested that we ditch the cafe and head back to my place. I was taken aback by his brazenness and politely refused, explaining that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of going to a private location on a first date. His face contorted with rage, and he slammed his fist on the table, causing the dishes to clatter and drawing the attention of the other patrons. He accused me of leading him on, his voice rising to a deafening shout that reverberated through the cafe. Fear gripped me as Tom forcefully grabbed my arm, yanking me out of my chair with a strength that belied his lean frame. Heart pounding, I managed to wrench myself free from his grasp and bolted out of the cafe, my heels clicking frantically against the pavement. I ran down the street, Tom's enraged shouts and heavy footsteps echoing behind me, growing closer with each passing second. Ducking into a narrow alley, I pressed myself behind a dumpster, holding my breath until the sound of his pursuit faded into the distance. With trembling hands, I hailed a taxi and fled back to the safety of my apartment, vowing never to use Tinder again. But the nightmare was far from over. In the days that followed, I was bombarded with a deluge of threatening messages from Tom. He knew where I lived, where I worked, and even the names of my family members. I lived in constant terror, jumping at every unexpected noise, every shadow that flickered in the periphery of my vision. I reported Tom's behavior to the authorities, but without concrete evidence, they could only do so much. Desperate for a sense of security, I made the heart-wrenching decision to upend my entire life. I moved to a new apartment across town, changed my phone number, and wiped my social media presence clean. I became a ghost, a shell of my former self, constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering if Tom was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. As the weeks turned into months, the messages gradually ceased, and I began to breathe a little easier. I dared to hope that perhaps Tom had finally given up, that I could start to piece my life back together. But one chilly autumn night, as I walked home from my new job, a sense of unease crept over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I could feel eyes boring into me from the darkness. I quickened my pace, my heart hammering against my ribcage, and then I heard it, the sound of footsteps growing louder, closing in on me. I spun around, and there he was, a sinister smile twisting his features, his eyes glinting with a malevolent hunger. Adrenaline surging through my veins, I ran like I had never run before, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. But Tom was faster, his strides fueled by a twisted obsession. He tackled me to the ground, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. I screamed until my throat was raw, praying that someone, anyone, would hear my cries for help. But the streets were deserted, the only sound the pounding of my own heart in my ears. As Tom raised his fist, a cruel sneer on his lips, I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the inevitable. I woke up in the hospital, my body broken and battered, but miraculously, I was alive. The police informed me that Tom had been apprehended, but the trauma I had endured would stay with me forever. The physical wounds would heal with time, but the emotional scars cut far deeper, etched into the very fabric of my being. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts, that I had never agreed to that fateful first date. Tinder may seem like a harmless way to connect with others, to find love or companionship, but it's crucial to remember that danger can lurk behind the most charming of profiles. It had been a long and frustrating week, so I was really looking forward to kicking back and having a few drinks on a Friday night. I was idly swiping through Tinder, not expecting much, when I came across Polly's profile. She was gorgeous, long, dark hair, striking green eyes, and a killer smile. Her bio mentioned that she was an adventurous, free spirit looking to meet new people. I figured, why not? I sent her a friendly message, and to my surprise, she responded right away. We chatted for a bit and hit it off surprisingly well. Polly seemed fun, easygoing, and we had a lot in common. Before long, we'd made plans to meet up at a bar downtown. I got there a little early and grabbed us a couple beers while I waited for her to show up. When Polly arrived, she was even more stunning in person. We made small talk, getting to know each other, and the conversation flowed naturally. She seemed genuinely interested in me, laughing at my dumb jokes and hanging on my every word. I was starting to think this might actually turn into a really great night. At one point, I took a big sip of my beer. It tasted a little off, almost like it had been watered down, but I didn't think much of it. I was just happy to be spending time with this beautiful woman who was clearly into me. We continued chatting and flirting, and eventually Polly suggested we get out of there. Not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, I happily agreed. The next thing I remember is waking up in an unfamiliar room, my head pounding. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. That's when I noticed my wallet was missing from my back pocket. Confused and a little freaked out, I grabbed for my phone, only to find that it had been completely wiped clean. All my contacts, messages, photos, everything gone. I stumbled out of the bed, my legs feeling wobbly. Where the hell was I? And what the hell had happened last night? As I made my way towards the door, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. I almost didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My hair was a mess, my clothes were disheveled, and there were faint bruises forming on my neck. Panic started to set in as the realization hit me. I'd been drugged and robbed. That cow Polly had set me up. I had to get out of there fast. I burst through the door and ran down an unfamiliar hallway, desperate to find an exit. Finally, I spotted a staircase leading down to what looked like the main floor of some kind of house, maybe. I crept down the stairs as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my ears. I had to get my bearings and figure out where the hell I was. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from another room. Holding my breath, I slowly peered around the corner. There she was, Polly, sitting on a couch and counting a wad of cash. Next to her was an older man who seemed to be giving her instructions. I strained to hear what they were saying, but I couldn't make out the words. All I knew was that I needed to get the hell out of there before they noticed me. I quickly ducked back around the corner, my mind racing. I had to find a way out, but I had no idea where I was or how I was going to get home. My phone was gone, my wallet was gone. I was completely stranded. Carefully, I made my way towards what looked like the front door, my eyes darting around for any sign of Polly or the other man. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling, when suddenly a voice called out behind me. The realization that I had been caught froze me in my tracks, my heart sinking. Slowly, I turned around to see Polly standing there, a sinister grin on her face. She sauntered towards me, eyes glinting with malice. A sense of dread washed over me as Polly approached, her movements fluid and predatory. There was no escape. My back was pressed against the door, with nowhere left to run. Polly's voice dripped with fake sweetness as she spoke, a stark contrast to the danger that radiated from her. She reached into her pocket, producing a small metallic object. My eyes widened in horror as I recognized it as a taser. Before I could react, Polly lunged forward and pressed the device against my chest. A jolt of electricity ripped through my body, and I crumpled to the floor, paralyzed and helpless. As the world faded to black, the last thing I saw was Polly's twisted grin, and I knew that my nightmare was only just beginning. When I finally came to, I was in a different room, my hands still bound behind my back. Polly was nowhere to be seen, but my phone was sitting on a nearby table, its screen dark. With a growing sense of dread, I strained against my restraints, desperate to reach the device. If I could just get to my phone, maybe I could find a way to call for help or at least figure out where I was. Ignoring the stinging pain in my wrists, I managed to inch my way towards the table, finally grasping the phone in my bound hands. With a deep breath, I pressed the power button, praying that it still had some life left in its battery. The screen lit up, and a wave of disbelief washed over me as I delved deeper into the phone's contents. Every trace of Polly had been erased, her messages, her photos, even her contact information. It was as if she had never existed in my life at all. Despair gripped me as I came to terms with the fact that I had been completely and utterly betrayed. With no way to call for help and no leads to follow, I was at the mercy of Polly and whoever else was involved in this twisted scheme. But even in the face of such overwhelming darkness, a glimmer of determination flickered within me. I wasn't about to give up without a fight. Somehow, someway, I was going to find a way to escape and expose Polly for the conniving, manipulative monster she truly was. It had been a rough few weeks, filled with long hours at the office and a seemingly endless stream of personal stressors. I was desperate for a distraction, something to help me take my mind off the endless cycle of work, bills, and responsibilities weighing me down. That's when I decided to give Tinder a try, figuring a little casual flirtation might be just the escape I needed. As I swiped through profile after profile, one in particular caught my eye, a gorgeous woman named Samantha. Her pictures were stunning, and her bio made her sound like the perfect blend of fun and sophistication. Against my better judgment, I sent her a message, half expecting to be ignored. To my surprise, Samantha responded almost immediately, and we started chatting. She was witty, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Before long, we were exchanging numbers and texting constantly, our conversations flowing as easily as if we'd been friends for years. As we continued to get to know each other, I found myself becoming increasingly drawn to Samantha. There was just something about her that resonated with me on a deeper level. Maybe it was the way she listened so intently, or the vulnerability she occasionally let slip through her confident facade. Whatever it was, I couldn't help but feel a connection starting to form. Just when I started to think this could actually go somewhere, Samantha dropped a bombshell. She had been accepted to a prestigious graduate program in another state, but she was short on the funds for a plane ticket. Would I be willing to help her out? It was only $1,000, she assured me, and she paid me back as soon as she could. I knew I should be skeptical that this reeked of a potential scam. But there was something about Samantha, the way she opened up to me in her apparent desperation, that made me want to trust her. Against my better judgment, I agreed to send her the money. The next day, I made the transfer, excitement and anticipation bubbling up inside me. I couldn't wait to finally meet this woman I'd grown so attached to. But as the hours turned to days, and I received no word from Samantha, a sinking feeling started to set in. I checked our conversation history, my heart sinking as I realized that every trace of her had been erased, the messages, the photos, even her contact information. It was as if she had never existed at all. Panic set in as the terrible realization hit me. I'd been scammed. That beautiful, charming woman was nothing but a carefully crafted illusion designed to manipulate me into handing over my hard-earned cash. I immediately contacted my bank, but it was too late. The money was long gone, vanished into the ether. Despair washed over me as I came to terms with the fact that I had been duped, and there was nothing I could do about it. In the days that followed, I found myself sinking deeper and deeper into a spiral of self-loathing and regret. How could I have been so stupid? I should have known better, should have seen the warning signs. But the allure of Samantha, her warmth and vulnerability had blinded me to the truth. As I wallowed in my misery, I couldn't help but wonder what else Samantha had taken from me. Had she accessed my personal information? Was there a chance she could use it to cause me even more harm? The uncertainty was maddening, and it was all I could do to keep from spiraling out of control. But even in the midst of my anguish, a glimmer of determination began to take hold. I may have been a victim once, but I'll be damned if I let Samantha or anyone else take advantage of me again. I was going to find a way to track her down, to expose her for the heartless con artist she was. This may have started as a simple Tinder hookup gone wrong, but it was quickly turning into a personal vendetta. Samantha may have gotten the better of me this time, but the next time we crossed paths, I'd be ready. And when I finally caught up to her, she was going to pay for what she'd done. I spent countless hours scouring the internet, searching for any clues that might lead me to Samantha. I combed through social media, scoured online forums, and even reached out to local law enforcement, but it was all to no avail. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Just when I was about to give up hope, a breakthrough came in the form of a Reddit post. Someone had apparently fallen victim to a similar scam, and they had managed to track down the perpetrator through a series of online breadcrumbs. Fueled by a newfound sense of determination, I dove headfirst into the investigation. It was a painstaking process filled with dead ends and false leads, but I refused to give up. I pored over every detail, piecing together a complex web of online identities and financial transactions. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, I caught a glimpse of Samantha's trail. She had been using a series of fake profiles and prepaid credit cards to cover her tracks, but with a combination of luck and dogged persistence, I managed to trace her back to a small apartment in a nondescript suburb. Without hesitation, I packed my bags and set out, hell-bent on confronting the woman who had so callously taken advantage of me. As I stood outside the apartment, my heart racing, I couldn't help but wonder what I would say, what I would do when I finally came face to face with Samantha. But in the end, all that mattered was that I had found her, and I was determined to make her pay for the pain and anguish she had caused me. With a deep breath, I knocked on the door, steeling myself for the confrontation that was to come. This was far from over. I have been feeling a little down in the dumps lately, the stresses of work and life starting to wear me down. That's when I decided to give Tinder a try, figuring a fun date might be just the pick-me-up I needed. As I scrolled through the endless sea of profiles, one in particular caught my eye, a guy named James who seemed charming, witty, and drop-dead gorgeous. His photos were impeccably curated, showcasing his chiseled features and toned physique. The bio he had crafted painted the picture of a confident, successful young professional with a great sense of humor. Something about the way he presented himself just drew me in, and before I knew it, we were chatting up a storm. Our conversation flowed as naturally as if we'd known each other for years. James was funny, intelligent, and oh so smooth with his flirtatious banter. I couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement at the prospect of meeting him in person. We made plans to grab dinner at a trendy sushi spot downtown, and I spent way too much time agonizing over what to wear. I wanted to look effortlessly chic, the kind of girl that would leave James speechless. As I put on the finishing touches and headed out the door, I could feel the butterflies fluttering in my stomach. When I arrived at the restaurant, I scanned the room, eagerly searching for any sign of my Tinder date. And that's when I spotted him, or at least who I thought was him. The guy sitting at the table didn't quite match the James I've been chatting with online. For one thing, he was significantly heavier and had a distinct geeky vibe that I definitely didn't remember from his profile. As I approached the table, my heart sank. This couldn't be the same person, could it? But as I got closer, our eyes met, and there was no mistaking the recognition in his gaze. This was the guy I had been talking to, the one who had so expertly crafted an online persona that was nothing like the reality standing before me. I felt my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and annoyance. How dare he lie to me like this? I'd gotten all dolled up, convinced that I was going to meet this handsome, charming guy, only to be confronted with someone who looked nothing like his profile pictures. And to make matters worse, he was shorter than me, which was a total pet peeve of mine. Without a word, I turned on my heel and headed straight for the exit, my mind racing. I couldn't believe I had fallen for such an obvious catfish. As I made my way to my car, I frantically blocked James' number and deleted our conversation, determined to erase any trace of this disastrous encounter. The drive home was a blur, my emotions a tangled mess of disappointment, anger, and a touch of humiliation. How could I have been so foolish? I should have known better than to trust someone's online persona, especially on a dating app. But the way James had presented himself, the easy rapport we had developed, it had all felt so genuine. Once I was safely back in my apartment, I collapsed on my bed, burying my face in my hands. I couldn't help but wonder what the hell had just happened. Was James some sort of creepy catfish who got off on duping unsuspecting women? Or was he just a desperately lonely guy who had resorted to deception in a misguided attempt to find a connection? Either way, I was determined not to let this experience taint my view of online dating. I'd been down this road before, and I knew that not everyone on these apps was a lying, manipulative jerk. But the sting of betrayal was still fresh, and I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. As I lay there, stewing in my thoughts, a sudden realization hit me. What if James wasn't just some harmless catfish? What if he was something more sinister, someone who had targeted me specifically? The idea sent a chill down my spine, and I found myself reaching for my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts. Maybe it was an overreaction, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be extra vigilant. I quickly called a close friend, filling them in on the disastrous Tinder date and my growing concerns. They promised to keep an eye out for me and assured me that I was just being paranoid. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread. Something about this whole situation just felt off. I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I got to the bottom of it. For the next few days, I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected noise and checking over my shoulder whenever I left the house. I tried to convince myself that I was being silly, that James was probably just a lonely loser who had gotten in over his head. But the nagging feeling of unease refused to go away. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started digging deeper into James' online presence, scouring social media and message boards for any clues about who he really was. And what I uncovered sent a chill down my spine. It turned out that James had a history of creating fake dating profiles and luring women into various scams. He was known for using stolen photos and crafting elaborate backstories to reel in his victims, only to vanish with their money or personal information. The more I learned, the more I realized just how much danger I had been in. Panic and fear gripped me as I considered the implications. Had James been planning something more sinister than just a simple catfishing scheme? Was I in real, tangible danger? The thought made my stomach turn, and I immediately contacted the authorities, providing them with everything I had uncovered. As the investigation unfolded, I found myself torn between relief and a lingering sense of dread. On one hand, I was grateful that I had trusted my instincts and taken action. But on the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. James was still out there, and who knew what other unsuspecting victims he had in his sights. For now, all I could do was continue to be vigilant, trust my gut, and never let my guard down. The world of online dating may have its risks, but I was determined to navigate it safely no matter what challenges lay ahead. It had been a rough couple of weeks, filled with long hours at the office and a seemingly endless stream of personal stressors. I was desperate for a distraction, something to take my mind off the constant grind and help me recharge. That's when I decided to give Tinder a try, figuring a little casual flirtation might be just the escape I needed. As I scrolled through the endless sea of profiles, one in particular caught my eye, a cute girl named Lily. Her photos were stunning, showcasing her vibrant personality and infectious smile, and her bio hinted at a quirky, adventurous spirit that instantly piqued my interest. Before I knew it, we had matched and started chatting. Our initial conversation was flirty and fun, and there was just something about Lily that drew me in. Maybe it was the way she effortlessly bantered back and forth, or the genuine curiosity she seemed to have about my life. Whatever it was, I found myself eagerly anticipating our first in-person meeting. When Lily suggested we meet up at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, I'll admit I was a little hesitant. It struck me as an oddly specific and somewhat sketchy location, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a cheesy horror movie. But part of me couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was just trying to be spontaneous and a little bit adventurous. I voiced my concerns, hinting that maybe we could find a more public, well-lit place to hang out instead. But Lily was insistent, assuring me that the warehouse was totally safe, and that it would be the perfect spot for us to get to know each other without any distractions. And if I'm being honest, the way she batted her eyelashes and pleaded with me made it kind of hard to say no. So against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her there. As I drove to the designated location, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Something about this whole situation just didn't sit right with me. I was too excited about the prospect of seeing Lily in person to let my nerves get the better of me. When I pulled up to the dilapidated warehouse, my heart sank. Instead of Lily, I saw two unfamiliar men standing outside, their faces partially obscured by the shadows. Panic gripped me as I realized this was clearly a setup, and I knew I needed to get out of there fast. Without a moment's hesitation, I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of there, my tires screeching against the pavement. In my rearview mirror, I could see the two men, their expressions twisted with anger and frustration, as they watched me make my escape. As I drove, my mind raced with a million questions. Who were those men? And where the hell was Lily? Had she set me up, or was she perhaps in just as much danger as I had been? The uncertainty ate away at me, and I found myself torn between the overwhelming desire to get as far away as possible and the nagging urge to turn around and try to find out what the hell was going on. In the end, self-preservation won out, and I kept driving, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment, where I immediately called the police and reported what had happened. The officers were understandably skeptical at first, but as I recounted the details of my Tinder date gone wrong, they seemed to take the situation more seriously. They promised to look into it, but warned me that without any solid leads or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Frustrated and shaken, I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every unexpected noise and compulsively checking my phone for any updates from the police. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow still in danger, that those two men were out there waiting to strike again. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take the uncertainty any longer, a breakthrough came in the form of a news alert on my phone. Authorities had uncovered a string of similar incidents, all involving Tinder users who had been lured to abandoned locations and targeted by groups of would-be robbers. The realization that I had narrowly escaped what could have been a much more sinister fate sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder how many others had fallen victim to this twisted scheme, and whether Lily was somehow involved or just another pawn in the game. Either way, I knew I had to do something. I reached out to the detectives handling the case, offering to provide whatever information I could to help them track down the perpetrators. It was the least I could do, both for my own peace of mind and to ensure that no one else would have to go through the same harrowing experience. As the investigation unfolded, I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and a lingering sense of vulnerability. But through it all, I was determined to come out the other side stronger and more resilient. This may have started as a simple Tinder date gone wrong, but it had quickly morphed into something much more sinister. and I wasn't about to let the bad guys win. I had always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to the world of online dating. To me, Tinder was just a casual way to dip my toes in the single scene, a harmless flirtation with the possibility of a real-life connection. But as I would soon discover, the digital realm has a way of bleeding into the physical in ways you never could have anticipated. It all started a few weeks ago when I matched with a guy named Alex on the app. He seemed nice enough, cute in a boyish sort of way, with a profile that hinted at a quirky sense of humor. We chatted back and forth for a bit, nothing too intense, just a playful exchange of witty banter and mild flirtation. But then something started to shift. Alex's messages became more frequent, more persistent. He would text me multiple times a day, even if I didn't immediately respond. His questions grew more probing, his tone more demanding. I could feel the desperation seeping through the screen, and it unnerved me. Sensing that this was veering in an unhealthy direction, I made the decision to unmatch Alex. I figured that would be the end of it, out of sight, out of mind, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The very next day, as I was running errands around town, I started to get this uneasy feeling that I was being watched. I'd catch a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd, only to blink and have it disappear. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But as the days went on, the sightings became more frequent, more undeniable. I'd be walking down the street and catch a flash of Alex's features in the corner of my eye. I'd be grabbing coffee and see him sitting in the back of the shop, his gaze fixed on me. It was as if he had become a phantom, haunting my every move. The fear and unease steadily grew until I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every shadow, every unexpected noise. I started altering my routines, taking different routes home from work, varying my schedules, anything to try and shake the feeling of being stalked. And then, one night, everything came to a head. I was leaving the gym, my muscles still aching from a particularly grueling workout. As I made my way to my car, I glimpsed a figure lurking in the shadows, just out of reach of the dim parking lot lights. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized it was Alex, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. Without a moment's hesitation, I bolted for my car, fumbling with my keys as I frantically tried to get the door unlocked. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me, his ragged breaths growing closer. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I managed to yank the door open and flung myself inside, slamming it shut just as Alex reached me. I sat there trembling as he pressed his face against the glass, his eyes wild and unfocused. I could see his mouth moving, but the pounding of my own heartbeat drowned out any coherent words. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, had to get somewhere safe. With shaking hands, I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving Alex behind in a cloud of exhaust. I drove like a madwoman, running red lights and taking turns at breakneck speeds, until I finally reached the relative safety of my apartment. Once inside, I collapsed onto the couch, my body racked with sobs. I couldn't believe this was happening, that what had started as a casual Tinder match had spiraled into a full-blown stalking nightmare. The violation of my personal space, the feeling of being watched and hunted, it was all too much to bear. In the days that followed, I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't bring myself to leave the apartment, terrified that Alex might be lurking out there waiting for me. I jumped at every sound, every passing car, convinced that he had found a way to track me down. Finally, after nearly a week of self-imposed isolation, I mustered the courage to contact the authorities. The police were understandably concerned, and they launched an investigation into Alex's actions. They promised to increase patrols in my neighborhood and advised me to keep a detailed log of any further sightings or incidents. As the weeks went on, the fear and paranoia slowly began to subside. The police assured me that they were keeping a close eye on the situation, and that Alex seemed to have disappeared. But the damage had already been done. I found myself constantly on edge, my trust in the world of online dating irrevocably shattered. I started to wonder if I would ever feel safe again, if I could ever trust another Tinder match without the nagging fear that they, too, might be harboring some dark, obsessive tendencies. The thought of Alex still out there somewhere, lurking in the shadows, sent a chill down my spine. One day, as I was walking in my car after work, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure out of the corner of my eye. My heart lurched, and I immediately started scanning the area, searching for any sign of Alex. But this time, the figure seemed to vanish as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with a lingering unease that I couldn't quite shake. I reported the sighting to the police, but they couldn't find any evidence to substantiate my claim. They assured me that they were doing everything in their power to keep an eye on the situation, but there was only so much they could do without a clear trail to follow. As the days turned into weeks, the sightings became fewer and farther between, until I started to wonder if I had simply been imagining them all along. But the fear and uncertainty never truly went away, lurking in the back of my mind like a persistent shadow. I knew that I needed to find a way to move on, to reclaim my sense of safety and security. But the thought of venturing back into the world of online dating, of putting myself at risk once again, made my stomach twist with dread. I had a string of bad luck in the dating worlds, so when I matched with Sarah on Tinder, I figured it was worth a shot. Her profile was alluring, gorgeous photos, a witty bio, and we even had a few shared interests. I sent her a message, and to my surprise, she responded right away. Our conversation flowed naturally, and there was an undeniable chemistry between us. Before long, we were making plans to meet up for drinks at a bar downtown. I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. Maybe this was the start of something special. The day of our date, I made sure to look my best, deciding on a crisp button-down and my favorite pair of jeans. As I walked into the dimly lit bar, my eyes immediately landed on Sarah. She was even more stunning in person, and I felt a surge of confidence as I approached her table. We ordered a round of drinks and dove right into getting to know each other better. Sarah was funny and engaging, and I felt myself hanging on her every word. There was just something about her that drew me in. Then you want to peel back the layers and discover what lay beneath the surface. But as the night wore on, I started to notice subtle shifts in Sarah's demeanor. Her gaze would occasionally drift, her smile seeming a tad too forced. And there was an intensity to her questions, a probing quality that made me feel almost uncomfortable. Still, I pushed those nagging doubts aside, telling myself that I was simply being paranoid. This was supposed to be a fun, casual date, and I was determined to enjoy myself. So I continued to play along, laughing at her jokes and sharing bits of my own life. It was when Sarah suggested we ditch the bar and go for a drive that the alarm bells really started going off in my head. Something about the way she said it, the almost predatory glint in her eye, sent a chill down my spine. But against my better judgment, I agreed, figuring we could just cruise around town and talk. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't help but notice that Sarah was taking us further and further away from the city center, heading towards a more remote, secluded area. The unease in the pit of my stomach grew with every passing mile, but I forced myself to stay calm, to not let on that I was starting to feel uneasy. Finally, Sarah pulled off the main road, turning onto a narrow, winding lane that seemed to lead deeper into the woods. My heart was pounding in my chest as she parked the car, turning to face me with a chilling smile. "This is perfect," she said, her voice low and almost predatory. "Now we can have some real privacy." In that moment I knew this woman wasn't who she seemed. She wasn't just some Tinder match looking for a fun night out. She was something far more sinister. And I was trapped, alone with her in the middle of nowhere. Panic gripped me as I fumbled for the door handle, desperate to escape. But before I could make a move, Sarah reached into her purse, producing a small, sharp knife. My blood ran cold as she reached across the center console, pressing the blade against my throat. She purred, her eyes gleaming with a twisted sort of delight. "I don't think so. You and I were just getting started." I sat there, frozen in terror, as Sarah outlined her plan. She was a serial killer, she told me, using Tinder to lure in unsuspecting victims like myself. And now that she had me right where she wanted me, she had no intention of letting me go. The drive back to the city was a blur, Sarah's knife never straying far from my skin. I knew that if I made one wrong move, it would be the end of me. So I sat there, silent and compliant, praying for some kind of miracle, some way to escape this living nightmare. When we finally pulled up to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town, my heart sank. This was it, the isolated location where Sarah planned to. I couldn't even bring myself to finish the thought. As she dragged me inside, I knew that I was running out of time. I had to find a way to get help to get out of this before it was too late. But with Sarah's knife pressed against me, I felt completely and utterly helpless. I don't know how long I was trapped in that dark, foreboding space, waiting for the inevitable. But just as Sarah was about to make her move, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Somehow, someway, the authorities had been alerted, and they were closing in. Sarah's eyes went wide with panic, and in her moment of distraction, I lunged for the knife, knocking it from her grasp. We grappled and fought, but I was fueled by pure adrenaline and the will to survive. Finally, I managed to break free and make a mad dash for the exit, just as the police burst through the doors. In the end, Sarah was apprehended and charged with a litany of heinous crimes. I was shaken, traumatized, but alive, a survivor of a Tinder nightmare that had come perilously close to ending in tragedy. As I sit here weeks later, I can't help but wonder how many others might have fallen victim to Sarah's twisted scheme. How many more unsuspecting Tinder users could she have lured to their doom if fate hadn't intervened? The world of online dating will never be the same for me, that's for sure. But I refuse to let the fear and paranoia consume me. I'm going to keep moving forward, keep living my life, even if I'm a little more cautious about who I let into it. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one who came out on top, and that's a victory I'll gladly take.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.